Je remercie donc
So good morning. Thank you very much, Chantal, for giving me the floor this morning and inviting me to this symposium. And it's a kind of a nostalgia which will lead me to explain why, as a researcher in road safety, I can read this declaration and sign also. Now, because in 1989, I was much younger and nicer than today and smarter. I was starting my research in road safety, and the first thing I learned is that the Department of the Sheriff, wanted to cut the plane trees because, people were getting killed because they were leaving their pubs late at night. And so I can still hear, people say, well, the plane tree, I could hear those people, young people saying, well, the plane trees, just jumped on my car, actually, and it's the fault of the plane tree. And so I spent all my professional life working on this topic. And so the jeopardizing the population of the 15-25 years old people. So I've been working on this topic. And so regarding my support to this declaration, and I like this sentence saying that you should handle the consequences and not the causes. And as a matter of fact, when a car hits a plane tree, there's a prevention, secondary prevention. That is, it depends on the car. The youngsters, most of the time have cars which are less protective than adults or those people who are rich. So the consequences are different depending on the type of car you have for the same accident, actually. And so the consequences for your health, or of course, and it depends on the speed, on the and then you're taken to the emergency, and then comes the question of the desertification. And now understanding what we call the accident knitting can be something completely different, like the Titanic or the Sauté life biography, for example. So what is going to create an accident? What is the concatenation of the various causes? And at the scientific level, we have the evolution of the psychology in the 20th century. That is the beginning. We speak about the energy. We have energy models and psycho. Also, this is psychological also is psychology is very important. And then we come the cybernetic information, IT, and so we're going to analyze many things with the idea of the level of organization, so a kind of a hierarchy, and with the constraints also in terms of organization. So, and it goes for the biological operating, but also in the way you drive your car. And so this cybernetic pressure, for example, can be a movement, and the strategic level is how am I going to move to go where I want to go. And so, for example, at 4 o'clock, if I have to go back home with someone who's been taking drug, it's not strategic. And at the tactical aspect, the try avoid the accident, and the operational aspect to succeed in this operation. And so, as a matter of fact, I started working on this and talking about the gendarme. The police, came to me and was telling me that most of the 15-25-year-old, the major cause of accidents, is 6 o'clock in the morning. We've been to the pub, we've been celebrating, have been having fun all night, and then suddenly there's the car. A collision, lateral collision with a fixed obstacle. In the department, there might be many trees, and maybe the plane tree is going to be the fixed object. But in the north of France, where there's no trees, for example, there are poles or who are playing the role of fixed obstacle. So this is the situation of the accident, and then there are 6 big factors behind all these causes. And of course, in the road safety, it's always speed. Of course, we're going to see that speed is by far, the cause of the accident, but it's always the reason why the harm is serious or not. For a car, hitting a plane tree, driving at 50 kilometers or 100 kilometers an hour, then sometimes in an article we have 5 people, who were harmed because they hit a plane tree. Alcohol is also responsible for the various accidents. 30% of the population is due to alcohol. A third factor, which is also specific to the 15 and 25-year-old, is cannabis. So taking drug. And sometimes, I mean, it's even dramatic when they mix products, the alcohol and a drug. If alcohol is multiplied by a factor 2 and drug 2, I mean, it's not a multiplication 2 by 2. I mean, it's even greater than that. I mean, the consequences are even greater. I mean, we come to a multiplication factor of 16 and not 4. And now, I mean, all the French population are not going to take a drug on a Saturday evening, but what we know that there's also the fact that they don't sleep that much also. I mean, they entertain and they entertain as much as they can. And so sometimes they lack hours of sleep. And so sometimes, I mean, and so when there is an accident, I mean, we can see, I mean, the car, I mean, doesn't follow the curve, but it just goes straight and hits the obstacle. The fourth factor is the occupation of the vehicle, which is characteristic of youth accidents, that everybody does not have a driver's license, and so people are packed in a car. And so this is why sometimes you can read that 4 people, 6 people, I mean, an accident with the same car. And also sometimes, I mean, a casual accident provoking casualties is happens very easily with these young populations. And so the fact of also fastening the seat belt, for example, is also very important, because in the front, I mean, people may use their seat belt, but in the back, it is seldom that people fasten their seat belt. So it's a great danger, and it can be a danger even if there's no plane tree, actually, because if you leave the road all of a sudden, and in this type of accident, I mean, the person who has less chance of surviving is the young woman sitting next to the driver, and most of the time that person is ejected from the vehicle, and so most of the time that person doesn't have much chance to live and survive. And this is the situation I studied all along my career. And then we thought, well, why do they do this? And what can we do so that they would kill themselves less in these situations? So I was talking about the accident knitting. And this to show you that we can go upstream with accidents, car accidents. I mean, talking about the Titanic, for example, you all saw the movie, but it's only the last second which is important. But I mean, all the sequence and all what happened in between. I mean, the one-third factor that between 2 and 18-year-old, I mean, you don't have the right to drive the car, and so you won't hit a plane tree. The problem that is between the 2 and 18, you follow what your mother and you observe what your mother and father does while driving the car. So a social factor is the observation. So father and mother is very important. Now, what you're going to observe is going to influence on your behavior. And in Canada, for example, I mean, the insurance is doing everything regarding road safety. It is the insurance. It does. I mean, it plays the role of the police, of the insurance, of the technicians, etc. And so all the accidents and all the offenses are being listed in the same computer, all what your father did and your mother did. I mean, all the accidents and all the damages caused, I mean, are listed. And so the kinds of cross-generation transmission which happens. Transmission of the kind of offense also. For example, a father taking drugs, for example, will influence the son or the daughter. And so there are various types of ways of driving, sometimes nervous and sometimes a quiet way of driving. And this is going to influence our children. So it's a big responsibility when a child is 18, because we should know that what we're going to convey to this child, I mean, it's going to, I mean, we're going to, the way we behave, I mean, will have an influence on the way they will behave in the future. And so there's something that we have to understand here in this, regarding these questions. And I also think of what David said regarding the perception of risk and risk-taking also. There's a big difficulty at that time of life is making the difference between two biologic aspects. I mean, we understand the teenage mind, brain. I mean, the science have made a lot of progress. We know that between 14, 15 years, I mean, the brain maturation was finished. We thought so. We know that it's not true. We know that today we have the rewarding system, which is going to manage our relation to pleasure, to well-being. And so pleasure sometimes is found in alcohol, in cannabis, or in sex, or in chocolate. I mean, or in taking power, but that reaches the same nervous system that is the rewarding system. And then, I mean, the testosterone also. So this is why it's a greater risk for the boys. And it's going to feed the dopamine and trigger dopamine. And dopamine is neurotransmitter of pleasure and happiness. And so whenever we have pleasure, I mean, we produce dopamine and we carry on producing dopamine. And so the teenager is going to be more sensitive to rewarding than the child he was before. So, and this, I mean, and then, I mean, there's and then life will take people to drink alcohol, and others, I mean, take risk by jumping in the mountain or something like that. But another part of our brain is the prefrontal cortex, which deal with executive functions. I mean, memory, attention, and flexibility. Planification, also planification. All my ways and journeys on the Saturday evening. I mean, if a death occurs at 4 o'clock, it's been decided in the afternoon. Well, because of through sort of decision-making models. Now, how am I going to drive, or where am I going to drive, which will lead me to this consequence? Now, this from the cortex is managing all this now, and it's already in the fetus when you're a baby, but in neurobiology, I mean, what is very important in our brain is not the areas, but are the synapses and the connections. And so everything which is connected to between the rewarding system and frontal cortex, I mean, they are not really connected until someone reaches 23 years old, for example, which means that these two systems are autonomous, independent. So the prefrontal cannot control the rewarding system, which means that its job, I mean, if you look at the balance, I mean, risk-taking, I mean, what is the profit, what is the benefit and loss? You always have to balance both. But that's when you're a teenager. And so then you start to identify all the consequences that are possible in terms of pleasure you may experience. Now, these are fundamental factors. I mean, I don't have much time to get into details, but 80% of casualties are men and 20% are women, and in the 20% of a female, are just half of this percentage are just women dying because they are passengers and they are sitting next to the driver who is a male. And so we can see that the gender of the driver is very important and is going to determine the whole road safety. And so, were there only women, I mean, hitting plane trains in the evening? Well, then we wouldn't be so many accidents because women behave differently than men. Sorry. Another factor is what we call the difficulty of the task. The question of calibration of how difficult the task is. Am I able to manage and monitor this task, or is it going to be too difficult? As a matter of fact, the fact that the car is not will not be able to turn on the road, then are you able to turn correctly? Or, I mean, whatever your age, I mean, the male, I mean, will say, no problem, I can do it, I can manage. I mean, the female, I mean, will question the situation. And so, of course, I mean, confidence is one of the factor of this gender difference. And again, I mean, there are some kind of a hierarchy in the organizational system because they're talking about this testosterone. I mean, of course, I mean, the women are not submitted to that, but we have the psychological factors also which interfere. And so the idea about education, how do we educate a boy, how do we educate a girl? And today, in 2023, there's a big difference because, I mean, we always, there's always this idea of what is good to be done, what is wrong. So we've seen how our brain is important, how our parents can impact on the way we're going to behave later. But beyond this, culture is also very important, which means that for 40 years, I mean, I've been studying the road accident, I mean, in all the countries around the world, but even with these biological problems and with these kind of tools, I mean, endangering the situation, despite all this, for 50 years now, the British, the Swedish population have same maturity. The young British and the young Swedish, I mean, produce twice less accidents than French do. So there are countries, I mean, producing more accidents and with the same population and with the same number of cars. And then, of course, I mean, if you compare France with Norway, for example, we know that not everything is equal in both countries in terms of traffic density, for example. I mean, this difference is so enormous and so big and so stable. We keep having this situation. If you look at the peak in 1972, I mean, for example, I mean, the accidents, I mean, even if the figures are increasing, they always increase, but proportionally. And British, for example, are always doing better than French. So we are in it's just like being in a boat also. I mean, when you deal with the road safety, I mean, it is the same way. I mean, people who are 80 or younger than that. But everything is not explained by the biology of the brain. I mean, even for the 15, 25-year-olds, culture is very important. Because for 18 years now, a young British child, for example, is going to drive just the way his father drove or his mother drove, and same for the French population. And also, I mean, the speed also can vary depending on the country. Thank you very much. Good morning, Eric Alonso. I wanted to know, I mean, I heard that the drivers sort of were tempted to drive with a constant risk-taking process. Now, is it true? Is it or is it debatable? Or regarding 3 avenues, I mean, this idea of narrowing the visual perspective, I mean, would that reduce the speed? I think that none of the 3 speakers broached this aspect this morning. Yes, I mean, what you mentioned is, I mean, it's all the evolution of road safety in the 70s to today. I mean, what you raise is the perceived risk, and the more you try to make things safer with supported driving infrastructures, I mean, the driver is going to wreck down everything. I mean, he'll drive with a high risk and high danger. But anyway, I mean, but this theory is not really valid today because, I mean, people cannot assess risk properly, because when I say you have one chance in 20,000 to have a lung cancer, for example, I mean, the brain is not ready to handle all this. But then, I mean, I spoke about the difficulty of the task. I mean, the driver is always trying to keep constant the difficulty of the task, and then they will play on the speed, on distraction. He will phone or not phone, whether he thinks that it's difficult or not difficult. So there's a compensation aspect, of course, but it's not a religion. That is, when the highway is in the dark, I mean, people are going to reduce their speed. Of course, there will be less casualties and less accidents on this section of road. But the elderly people, I mean, will do it even more frequently. So, and they will reduce their speed, and it's kind of a differential psychology. There's a kind of compensation, but I mean, we shouldn't turn it into a kind of political religion. Now maybe regarding the positive aspect of trees, but really in here, I mean, we should fall into the visual perception and the psychology, because, but it's not my field of competence, but I heard some experts regarding the visual perception, and it is true that when you enter the city, for example, you have to reduce the speed from 130 to 50. There's a lot of speed offenses because sometimes they're not driving too slowly. And so, I mean, these trees on either side of the road, I mean, the more you have indices and the more you have this feeling of a speed. So if you remove these obstacles, then the person doesn't feel he's driving so fast. And so, but then, I mean, we have to go deep in details, I mean, for people who are specialized in visual perception. Among others, I mean, studies which were carried out in the south of France, in Provence, where we sort of observed drivers on various roads and journeys, and we checked how they were cautious or not. And we noticed that there was a reduction of speed with these trees and plane trees being planted. So there was well, it was not the majority, but most of the time the people were more cautious. And another study also who looked at the way the road would interfere in road safety. And this study showed that there was a reduction of speed when the environment was nice, and more specifically when, I mean, one of their measures was that, and more specifically when an avenue was blooming and blossoming.
Well, in answer to the question, I would have said that I knew someone called John Adams many years ago who researched road safety, and he was firmly convinced that people did take compensatory. They did behave differently when they were aware that there were safety measures in place to protect them, and they would increase their amount of risk taking. So in the case of trees along the side of the road, if they're there, drivers will sensibly, because people are not totally stupid, not all the time anyway, they will drive a bit more slowly. If you take those trees away, I would expect that they would drive a bit faster. And it may well be that the John Adams risk compensation theory has got something going for it. And I think you can see this in lots of walks of life where people are supposedly made safer by engineering controls, but the risk returns to the same level. And you can see it in children's playgrounds because of all those massive safety measures which have been implemented. If you look at the number of injuries on children's playgrounds over the decades when all those measures were implemented, what has happened? The number of injuries stayed the same. Amazing.
That may not, what I will say about will not be a study but anecdotal evidence. I heard it from the chief of police in Poznań, which is one of biggest towns of Poland. In Poznań, in the region, he told me about this section of the road where there were no accidents until trees were removed. And as they looked into the issue, it turned out that the geometry of the road was such that it tolerated only certain speed. And once the trees were removed, people began driving faster, evidently. Thank you.